Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fenske. Dr. James Loomis has the Washington University pedigree. He's on the clinical faculty of the Department of Internal Medicine at its School of Medicine. He also serves as the current medical director of the Barnard Medical Center in Washington, D.C. And beyond that, he's got practical experience. He's the former team physician for both the St. Louis Rams and the Cardinals. So when Dr. Loomis talks, people pay attention. His appearance in the new Netflix documentary, The Game Changers, has ignited a debate challenging long-held conceptions about what athletes should eat for optimum performance. And he's joined us by phone today to talk about it. Dr. Loomis, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
For those of you listening out there, have you attempted a plant-based diet? What was the impact on your health? You can call us at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Or you can send us a tweet at STL on air or email us at talk@stlpublicradio.org. Dr. Loomis, the documentary, The Game Changers, it takes on what you call the locker room mythology about meat, protein, and strength. Traditionally, what did we think athletes should be eating?
Well, I mean, the attitude of most athletes for many years was that you had to eat meat to get protein, and we needed that protein to get big and strong. And again, that meat was the best source, but that's clearly just not true. And as the documentary, I think, does an amazing job pointing out, there are many, many highly successful athletes, both in the strength world, bodybuilders and weightlifters and football players, but also endurance athletes who really thrive on a plant-based diet.
It's interesting, this film, they talk about Carl Lewis and Edwin Moses. These were some really high-profile people, but it feels like the diet that they chose almost sort of flew under the radar of the general public. Why do you think none of us noticed that here, these guys are vegan?
Well, I think for many years, veganism has kind of had a stigmata about it, that somehow if you didn't eat meat, you weren't manly enough. And many athletes, hid that from their colleagues and from the public in general. It was very interesting when I was in L.A. for the red carpet premiere of Game Changers, had the opportunity to speak with Chris Paul, the NBA basketball player. And he told me, which is really profound, he had just fairly recently gone to a plant-based diet and said that he didn't want to tell anybody that he had gone plant-based, not because they were afraid they would make fun of him, which would have been the case even a few years ago, but because he felt like it gave him such a profound performance advantage, which is so amazing to hear. But again, I think that I think Darren Morgan talks about this in the film, the Tennessee Titans defensive player, that many of his teammates made fun of him when they found out he went plant-based until they started to see his performance on the field. And then they started to ask him, so, what is it you're doing again? And they came on board as well.
So what kind of reaction are you seeing from this film? It certainly seems counterintuitive for people who haven't really been paying attention to this issue.
Well, it's really been astounding. I think it far exceeded anyone's expectations, the producers and myself included. I'm an endurance athlete myself, and I'm on a number of Facebook, Ironman, and marathon groups. And just in the last 3 or 4 weeks, they have been filled up with people who are asking, "Hey, I just saw Game Changers. I want to go plant-based. Anyone here doing that? Can I get guidance?" You look at search terms for plant-based on Google. Since October, I think, 16th, when it went live on Netflix, there's been over a 300% increase in people searching for the term plant-based on Google. Companies are reporting record sales of plant-based foods. It's just really been, and here in the my practice focuses on helping patients transition to a plant-based diet, and we've seen a marked uptick in patients requesting new appointments to come see us to help make that transmission, especially ones with chronic health problems.
So if this is such an obvious thing that can really help people, why is it that people would then need a professional to help them do it? Is it hard to get the right kind of protein from plants?
No, it's not hard at all. But, well, first of all, many patients that we see, so let me just to back up for a minute. The beautiful thing to me about a plant-based diet is it doesn't really matter if you're interested in leading a healthier life or performing athletically, or you're concerned about the environment, or you're compassionate about other creatures, it turns out the answer is all the same, and that's a plant-based diet. And the impact it has on the treatment, prevention, and even reversal of many chronic diseases like diabetes and high blood pressure and cholesterol and heart disease is significant. And many patients, even driven by the film Game Changers, if they've got a chronic medical condition, they need that their medications need to be de-prescribed, if you will, which does need to come from under the guidance of a professional. And I think the other thing that's important to realize is that I do make a clear distinction between being on a plant-based diet, a whole food plant-based diet, and a vegan diet. Veganism historically has come from an ethical place around being not harming animals and not wearing products tested on animals and not using products made from animals. But frankly, there's still a lot of very unhealthy foods that are vegan. Oil is vegan, white flour is vegan, sugar is vegan, Oreos are vegan, Dr. Pepper is vegan, none of which are good for your health. And so I think having someone guide you through the process to really help be sure that you're getting a well-balanced, whole food, plant-based diet is really important.
Okay. I feel like anecdotally, the number one thing you'll hear from people who will just briefly dabble in the vegetarian diet is they feel like they can't get enough energy or can't get a diverse enough menu from just plants. What do you think they're doing wrong?
Well, I think that's again clearly a misconception. And it's very interesting. I moved to a plant-based diet in around 2011. I had developed a number of personal health problems, and I thought I was eating healthy. It was mainly whole grains and fresh fruits and lean meat and low-fat dairy, and try not to eat too much ice cream and too many donuts. And I could kind of out-exercise that. I injured my knee, had to have surgery, didn't do the rehab, put on a bunch of weight, and developed a number of chronic diseases. And I saw another documentary, which I would recommend the listeners to check out if they haven't seen it, is Forks Over Knives, about using food as medicine. And was able to reverse many of those chronic diseases. And when I reflect back on my diet before, I had several kinds of meat, beef, chicken, fish, maybe a little pork, and about 6 vegetables in rotation, potatoes and corn and lettuce. So it was a fairly limited diet, and I was cooked different ways. Now, it's astounding how many new foods you discover, and when you really start to understand the importance, all the different fresh fruits and vegetables and the different kinds of grains and all the different beans and lentils, it's really, for me, opened things up culinary-wise, because I enjoy cooking, and really presented me with a whole new world of food to explore and try.
So how do plant-based proteins like beans and lentils compare to the protein in meat? Is it comparable, or are these just a different form of what we've historically thought of as protein?
Well, protein is made up of individual amino acids, and in the human body, there's about 13 or so amino acids that we can't make. We have to consume from food. So when we consume protein, that protein is broken up into the individual amino acids and then reabsorbed into our bodies and then reassembled to make the protein that we need. And I think what people don't realize is, where does the protein in the cow that you eat to get protein, where did it come from? Mm-hmm. What came from what the cow ate, right? So what do cows eat? Well, they eat plants. So you don't turn on a special on mountain gorillas or elephants on National Geographic, and the first thing you worry about is, oh my God, where do they get their protein? And so it's I think people just don't really understand. We've come to equate meat with protein, when in fact the ultimate source of the protein in any living creature ultimately is the plants down the food chain. And so plants have protein, plants have plenty of amino acids, and it is impossible to develop an individual amino acid or protein deficiency on a plant-based diet as long as you're consuming enough calories.
Now, on average, do you think people are getting too much, too little, or just enough protein?
Well, if you look at the Standard American Diet, SAD diet, by the way, which is an appropriate acronym. When you look at Standard Western Diet, most people are consuming about 3 to 4 times more protein than they need. And our bodies we can't store protein. We can store fat. We can store carbohydrate. We store carbohydrate in the form of glycogen. We store fat in the form of fat cells for future energy, but we can't store protein. So once you've reached the capacity where you've got enough protein, we convert it back to nitrogen and excrete it in our urine. And it's also been shown that the overconsumption, especially of animal proteins, increases your risk for cancer by about 4 times normal, about 400%. And there's some unique properties. There's a mix of amino acids that occur more commonly in animal-based protein, particularly the methylated or sulfated amino acids, which seem to be more carcinogenic. Also, many of the high protein animal-based foods, like dairy, for example, has high levels of IGF-1, insulin growth factor 1, which also has been showed to promote tumor growth. So there does seem to be a clear difference between even if you're over-consuming animal-based proteins, it doesn't seem to have the same health risks that the overconsumption of plant-based proteins do not seem to have the same health consequences of that of overconsumption of animal-based proteins.
So you're talking about some of these links between eating these animal products and some of these diseases. Is the data showing this at this point as a causation, or are we just looking at a strong correlation here?
Well, it's really hard to do longitudinal nutritional research. One of the criticisms is that, where's the randomized controlled trial, which is kind of the gold standard of how we do research, where you take a group of people and do one thing, and another group you do another thing, and then you follow them over a long period of time. Well, you can't really do that with nutrition. You can't put someone on a plant-based diet and follow them for 100 years and take another group and put them on an animal-based protein and see how they differ. So we have to rely partly on population-based study, epidemiologic studies, and look for these correlations. But when we see the correlations, if they make biologic sense, then I think it's pretty strong evidence that correlation is part of the causation. Mm-hmm. There have been intervention studies. The only research that's ever been shown, for example, to truly reverse coronary artery disease is work that was published by Dean Ornish in the late 80s, early 90s, where it showed that a plant-based diet combined with exercise and mindful meditation was able to reduce blockage. That's never been shown for any other diet. We've done research here at our organization in Washington, D.C., going head-to-head with a plant-based diet versus a standard ADA, American Diabetes Association diet in diabetics, and shown that a plant-based diet is more effective at the treatment and sometimes even reversal of type 2 diabetes than the standard American diet that we typically talk about.
Well, Dr. Loomis, you make a really compelling case that this is the way to go. But what do you see as the biggest challenges to getting people to sign on for this? Certainly not everybody is following you on this. There's still a whole lot of people out there eating a lot of meat.
Well, I think there's a lot of issues. If you think about it, even in the medical community, we have really institutionalized the way of eating that we see today in modern society, which is arguably one of the major drivers of this healthcare crisis we have today. We're going to spend about $3.6 trillion on healthcare this year, and 80% of which is felt by the CDC to be spent on preventable diseases. And diet drives a lot of that. But we're not taught this stuff in medical school, so you don't have physicians counseling patients about it. As discussed in the movie Game Changers, the marketing. There's no big blueberry that's putting ads on TV and funding research, and so there's really a lot of barriers around people really understanding the fundamental importance of this. The way we subsidize farming and things like that, which have made certain foods relatively cheap compared to vegetables. U.S. dietary guidelines that are heavily influenced by the food industry, so what we feed our kids, and which is not necessarily healthy. And so we start learning these unhealthy behaviors at a young age. So there's a lot of issues. We've learned bad choices. We're surrounded by cheap, convenient, tasty bad choices, and we're surrounded by a lot of other people who make bad choices.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like it's almost more a systemic problem than individual eating choices.
That's exactly right.
Dr. James Loomis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And if people are interested in knowing more about the arguments that Dr. Loomis is making and the argument made by this film, it's called The Game Changers, and it's now streaming on Netflix. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.